We're here in the office of Lindsey Wilson College Assistant Professor of Political Science Stefan Brooks in the Everett Building on the AP White campus for a special Inauguration Day Lindsey Wilson Conversations. Stefan's going to give us his impressions of President Obama's inaugural address. What are your impressions?
I thought it was a pretty good speech. It was rather frank. He acknowledged that the country is facing a significant amount of problems, but he sought to instill confidence in the viewers and those in attending, saying that we will meet these challenges. But he did, I thought, sought to dampen expectations that these problems would be solved by him very quickly. He said that these problems would take quite a while to be resolved. He also said that we must redouble our efforts in Afghanistan, and said we must start to responsibly turn over Iraq to the Iraqis. Thus, I think, trying to maintain one of his campaign promises to get out of Iraq. With respect to the economy, he did say that the market is very good at creating jobs and creating wealth, but requires supervision, or I think the word he used was that government must watch the economy.
As a political scientist, what are you going to follow most closely in the first 100 days of the Obama administration?
The $1 trillion stimulus package that Obama's proposed to revive the economy is going to be the centerpiece of his 100 days. What'll be interesting to see is how much compromising he'll have to do with the Congress with respect to the actual details of the plan. It'll also be interesting to see how quickly the stimulus plan will be able to be enacted, because $1 trillion is a significant amount of money. I mean, so is $100 billion, but I would imagine that with $1 trillion, the plan is going to be, far more extensive and detailed, and it'll just be interesting to see how he works with the Congress, how the Congress works with him, and in addition to just the details of the stimulus plan, how quick it'll able to be enacted.
President Obama enters office as one of the more popular presidents in recent U.S. history. From a political science perspective, what's the best way to use that political capital he has?
He probably has to deliver very quickly. By that I mean there's tremendous expectations on his shoulders, perhaps more than any other president in recent times. And I think that if he does not deliver, or at least start to deliver on some of the promises and hopes and expectations that many of his voters, and to be fair, I guess all Americans have on their new president to solve the nation's problems, disappointment will settle in. So I think he's going to devote, as I think he has said, a lot of his attention to the economy, and if he can get that stimulus package enacted relatively quickly, with his priorities largely left intact, without the Congress perhaps changing it or modifying it, I think that'll be an early victory and also an early form of reassurance among many of his voters.
President Obama enters the White House after being a U.S. Senator for just 4 years. Does his relatively little amount of legislative experience work for him or against him from a political science point of view?
Well, I think according to the discipline and also my personal opinion, Obama's lack of legislative experience is a negative. Our most successful presidents have had strong legislative experience. Indeed, you develop legislative skills only through having legislative experience. The ideal quality for a president is strong legislative experience, and that is gained by having served in Congress or the state legislature. Perhaps also as a governor. Our most successful presidents, such as Roosevelt, Johnson, Reagan, and even Clinton, and perhaps one could argue George W. Bush, who, notwithstanding his unpopularity, was a rather successful governor, and even as president did advance a significant amount of legislation, whether you agree with it or not. But if you look at presidents who have had limited success in enacting legislation, Jimmy Carter, President George H. Bush, the father, I think that was largely due to the fact that they had very little, if any, legislative experience. So in my classes, I always tell the students that if we were to create an ideal president from scratch, at the top of the list would be a long and distinguished career in Congress. Because presidents spend most of their time dealing with Congress to get their bills through Congress. And the best way to be able to do that is to have served in Congress. A second best is, were you a successful governor? Because as governor, you spend a lot of time dealing with the state legislature too. And Roosevelt was a very successful governor. Of course, he was also Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and he knew how Washington worked.
At the time that we're recording this interview, the Bush presidency ended less than 2 hours ago. It's still early to look back on his presidency, but as you look back on the 43rd President of the United States, what are some things we're likely to remember about his presidency?
Well, I think many people are going to remember his low poll numbers, and I think there was clearly a significant amount of fatigue and disenchantment with him. But I think it is worth remarking that one of his major accomplishments that everyone seems to have forgotten, ironically perhaps because he was so successful at doing it, is this country has not been attacked again since September 11th. There have been attacks overseas, but yet we have not been attacked again since September 11th. And I don't think that anyone cannot acknowledge, honestly, that Bush deserves a lot of credit for that.
The task of political science is to look back rather than ahead. But looking ahead a few years, what might the impact of the Obama election be on voter participation and civic engagement from your perspective?
Well, Obama's candidacy, his winning the nomination of the Democratic Party, and his winning of the election has certainly energized a lot of voters, particularly young voters who are some of the most apathetic people in this country. And so the fact that someone that young and with his background being biracial, a father from another country, his mother being American, growing up overseas, having a pretty tough life, yet surmounting all of that and being rather successful, may re-energize Americans' faith in the American dream and also in our political system.
Assistant Professor of Political Science, Stefan Brooks, thank you for joining us for this special Inauguration Day Lindsey Wilson Conversations.
Thank you very much.